Sylvester Stallone had seen it all. The blinding lights of Hollywood, the roaring cheers of fans, the luxury of mansions and private jets. But nothing in his life, no award, no blockbuster deal, could have prepared him for what he was about to witness that night. It was supposed to be just another evening in New York, a quick dinner, a quiet stroll through the city that had shaped his career, the place where he had once been just a kid with a dream. He pulled his collar up against the cold air, blending in with the late-night crowd as he walked past the glowing shop windows and the never-ending stream of yellow cabs. Then he saw her. At first, it was just a shadow among the many figures on the sidewalk. A woman, sitting on a flattened cardboard box near the entrance of a small cafe. Her coat was torn, her hair tangled, her hands gripping an old coffee cup filled with a few crumpled bills. A beggar, another forgotten soul in the city that never sleeps. He might have walked past her if not for one small impossible detail, her eyes. Even through the dim glow of the streetlights, there was something about them, something familiar, something that made his heart stop. He froze in place, his breath catching in his throat. No way, it couldn't be. Not after all these years, not here in a city of millions. But the longer he stared, the more the memories came rushing back. He had known those eyes once, known them in the way a young man knows his first love. A name buried under decades of fame, fortune, and distance surfaced in his mind. Isabella. The girl he had once planned a future with. The girl he had left behind when Hollywood called. And now, she was homeless. Stallone felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He had faced ruthless Hollywood executives, survived brutal fight scenes on set, even stood his ground in the cutthroat world of show business. But nothing compared to the way his chest tightened in that moment. She hadn't seen him yet. Her head was slightly bowed, eyes dull, shoulders hunched against the cold. She looked exhausted, drained, lost. For a second, he considered walking away. Maybe she wouldn't recognize him. Maybe she didn't want to be recognized. Maybe whatever had happened to her wasn't his business anymore. But then a gust of wind blew through the street, and she shivered. That was it. He couldn't pretend he didn't see her. He couldn't ignore what was right in front of him. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "Excuse me, miss." His voice was careful, quiet, unsure, even. He hadn't felt unsure in decades. Isabella looked up. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, their eyes met. At first, there was nothing. Just a vague look of acknowledgement, like she was seeing just another stranger. Then her expression changed. Her brows knitted together, her lips parted slightly. Recognition flickered in her tired eyes. "Wait," she murmured, barely above a whisper. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear away the years that had separated them. Sly? Hearing her say his name, his real name, not the one fans chanted, not the one flashing on movie posters, hit him like a freight train. He nodded. Yeah, it's me, Isabella." A sharp breath escaped her lips. Her hands trembled slightly, and for a moment, it seemed like she was about to say something important. But then, as if a wall suddenly went up inside her, she looked away. I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she muttered, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Stallone crouched down beside her, ignoring the glances from passers-by. None of them mattered right now. "Neither did I," he admitted. "What happened, Isabella?" She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice laced with something too broken to be sarcasm, too tired to be anger. Stallone nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do." A pause. The city hummed around them, car horns, distant sirens, the murmur of people walking by. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I lost everything, Sly, everything." And for the first time in years, Sylvester Stallone felt completely helpless. Stallone sat there, crouched on the cold pavement, staring at the woman he had once imagined spending his life with. The Isabella he had known was full of fire, full of life, always smiling, always dreaming big. But now, she was a shell of that person. He had to know. He had to understand. "Talk to me, Isabella," he said, his voice softer than it had been in years. "Tell me what happened." She let out a slow, trembling breath, rubbing her hands together for warmth. "It's a long story," she muttered. "I got time." For a moment, she hesitated, then let out a dry laugh, one without any real joy. "You really want to hear how I went from dreaming about our future to sitting on a sidewalk, begging strangers for change?" Stallone nodded firmly. "Yeah, I do." She exhaled, looking down at the cracks in the pavement as if they held the answers she had lost long ago. "After you left for Hollywood, I tried to keep going. I really did. I got married, bad idea. Thought he was the one, but he wasn't. He drank a lot. Did worse than that, too." Stallone's jaw tightened. He didn't have to ask what she meant. "I left him. Thought I'd start over. Got a job, started saving. But life has a way of kicking you when you're already down, huh?" Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly swallowed the emotion. "Then Mom got sick, real bad. I spent everything I had trying to take care of her. Every cent, every hour, everything. And when she finally—" She paused, her fingers gripping the fabric of her coat like it was the only thing keeping her together. "When she finally passed, I had nothing left." Stallone could feel something heavy pressing on his chest. He had fought his way out of poverty, but he had never truly been alone. There was always someone in his corner. Isabella? She had no one. "I tried, Sly," she whispered. "Tried to find work. But no one hires a woman my age with no savings, no place to stay, no one to vouch for her. I slept in shelters at first, then on couches, well, now I'm here." She gestured around, as if the entire cold, indifferent city was her home now. "So yeah," she muttered, looking up at him with tired eyes. "That's my story. Hope it was worth the listen." Stallone felt his throat tighten. This wasn't right. This wasn't her story. This wasn't how it was supposed to end for her. "Come with me," he said suddenly. Isabella blinked. "What?" "Come with me," he repeated, standing up and offering his hand. "We're getting you out of here, tonight." For the first time since they had locked eyes, she looked afraid. "Sly, you can't just fix this," she whispered. He looked at her, his gaze firm, unshakable. "Watch me." For a long moment, Isabella didn't move. She just sat there, staring up at Stallone as if she didn't recognize him anymore, as if the name, the face, the man she had once loved were just distant memories of a life she had forgotten how to believe in. He stood there, hand outstretched, waiting. "Come with me," he said again, voice steady but urgent. Isabella shook her head. "Sly, you don't get it." She looked away, her fingers gripping the fabric of her coat, pulling it tighter around her fragile frame. "You're living in a different world now. A world where people like me don't get second chances, where no one just swoops in and fixes everything." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "This isn't a movie, Sly. There's no big hero moment, no happy ending. People like me don't just wake up one day and find their way back." But Stallone wasn't letting go. He crouched down again, leveling his gaze with hers. "Isabella, I didn't come back into your life to leave you here." She clenched her jaw, looking away. "I'm not leaving," he said, firmer this time. "You need a way out? I'm giving you one." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "It's not that simple." "Yeah, it is," he cut in. "You get up, you come with me, and you let me help. That's it." Isabella shook her head again, but this time her resistance was cracking. "And then what, huh?" She snapped, suddenly defensive. "You put me in a fancy hotel for a few nights, throw me some cash, and then what? What happens when you move on? When this moment is over and I'm still just this?" Her voice broke on the last word. Stallone didn't blink. "You think I'm just doing this because I feel bad for you?" She didn't answer. "You're Isabella," he said, his voice low but full of something fierce. "The same woman who used to tell me I'd never make it if I didn't fight harder. The woman who believed in me before anyone else did. You think I'm gonna walk away now?" A tear slipped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. For the first time in years, she didn't look broken. She looked terrified. Terrified of believing. Terrified of hope. "I don't know if I can do this, Sly," she whispered. He let out a breath, shaking his head. "You don't have to do it alone." Silence. The city buzzed around them. The streetlights flickered. A car horn blared somewhere in the distance. And then slowly, hesitantly, she reached for his hand. Her fingers were cold, frail. But when he closed his hand around hers, there was strength there. She stood up, for the first time in years. Stallone didn't let go of her hand as he led her away from the cold pavement that had been her home for far too long. Isabella's steps were hesitant, almost as if she expected the world to stop her, as if she didn't quite believe this was real. Neither did she, nor did the people around them. They reached his black SUV parked at the curb. His driver looked confused, but said nothing as Stallone opened the door and gestured for Isabella to get in. She hesitated. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "Somewhere warm," he answered simply. Isabella bit her lip, looking down at her own hands. "You sure about this, Sly?" she whispered. "You sure you want to drag me into your world? People like me, we don't fit there." Stallone exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You think I care what anyone else thinks?" She swallowed hard and finally stepped in. As the car door shut, enclosing her in the quiet luxury of the vehicle, she sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, as if afraid to touch anything. The drive was silent at first. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look out the window. She just stared at her hands, as if wondering if they even belonged in a place like this anymore. Finally, Stallone spoke. "You hungry?" She hesitated before nodding. "Yeah," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't even remember the last time I had a real meal." That hit him like a punch to the gut. "We'll fix that," he said. "Everything starts tonight." "I don't belong here." The words cut deep. "You don't belong out there either," he shot back. "So pick one." For a second, she just stared at him, then exhaled shakily and nodded. Inside the hotel room, she barely stepped past the doorway. The lights were warm, the bed was massive, the bathroom was marble, and everything about it felt like another planet compared to where she had been sleeping the night before. "Go ahead," Stallone said gently. "Take a shower, change, relax." She nodded, but she didn't move right away. Instead, she turned to face him, tears brimming in her eyes. "Why are you doing this, Sly?" He sighed, shaking his head. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago." She blinked quickly, like she was afraid if she cried, she might fall apart completely. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the bathroom. As the door clicked shut, Stallone sat down on the chair by the window, staring out into the city. How had it come to this? How had she, Isabella, ended up on the streets, while he had spent his life in mansions and on red carpets? And more importantly, was one night enough to fix years of being broken? The minutes stretched into an hour. The sound of running water echoed through the hotel suite as Isabella showered for the first time in what was probably months. Stallone sat near the window, staring out at the New York skyline, lost in thought. He had spent decades playing characters who never backed down from a fight, but this was real. This wasn't a movie, and there was no script telling him how to fix things. Would she even stay? Would she trust him enough to let him help? The bathroom door finally creaked open. Stallone turned, and for the first time in the entire night, he barely recognized her. Isabella stood in front of him, wrapped in a thick hotel robe, her hair damp and loose over her shoulders. Her face was clean, free of the dirt and exhaustion that had masked her features. She looked like herself again, but not completely. There was still something in her eyes, something hollow. Something that told him that a shower, a warm room, and a meal weren't enough to erase what life had done to her. She walked slowly toward the bed and sat down, running a hand over the soft white sheets. "I forgot what this feels like," she muttered. Her voice was so quiet, so fragile, Stallone almost didn't hear her. "What?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "Being warm." Those two words hit him harder than any punch he had ever taken on screen. For years, he had lived in luxury. Big houses, private jets, five-star hotels. He had never thought twice about what it meant to have a warm bed at night. But Isabella had spent years without one. Years. And now she sat there, running her fingers over the blankets like they were something foreign. Something unreal. "Sly," she whispered suddenly. He straightened, his entire body alert at the sound of his name. "Yeah?" She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the fabric of the blanket. "I don't know if I can do this." There it was. That fear, that doubt. He had seen it in her eyes when he first approached her, had felt it in the way she hesitated before taking his hand. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of hope. She was afraid of believing that this wasn't just a dream that would end the moment she woke up. "I don't belong here," she muttered. "Stop saying that," Stallone said firmly. She finally looked at him, and there was something almost angry in her expression. "Why? Because you think you can save me?" "Because you're not beyond saving," he shot back. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you?" she whispered. "I'm not the same girl you left behind, Sly. That girl had dreams. That girl had hope." Her voice cracked. "That girl died a long time ago." Stallone's chest tightened. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees, his voice calm but unshakable. "Then let's bring her back." Isabella stared at him, her lower lip trembling. "How?" "One step at a time," he said simply. "You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to know where you're going yet. But you have to start somewhere, and you're not doing it alone." Silence. She looked down at her hands, at the robe wrapped around her body, at the hotel room that wasn't hers but felt like something she had lost a long time ago. And then slowly, cautiously she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. It was barely a word, barely a breath, but it was something. And for now, it was enough. Stallone could feel it the moment he saw her sitting there, stiff and ready to bolt. Isabella was already dressed, her shoulders tense, her hands clenched together as if she were bracing herself for something. She wasn't planning to stay. He moved carefully, deliberately, as though any sudden movement might send her running. "Morning," he said, his voice low and calm. She didn't respond. He exhaled, lowering himself into the chair across from her, watching her closely. "You're leaving." A faint, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "If I knew you still knew me this well, I never would have come." Stallone leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Why?" She ran a hand through her freshly washed hair, as if she still wasn't used to the way it felt, clean and soft again. "Because this isn't real, Sly." Her voice was quiet, but sharp. "This is a borrowed moment. A scene in someone else's movie. And you and I both know how that ends." He frowned. "It doesn't have to end." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You don't get it. People like me, we don't get second chances. This?" She gestured around the hotel room. "This isn't my life, it's yours. I'm just a glitch in the system, a mistake that got caught in your orbit for a night." His jaw tightened. "That's not true." She turned to look at him then, and for the first time her eyes weren't just tired, they were scared. "And what happened, Sly?" "Huh? You put me in a nice place for a few weeks? Maybe even find me a job? Then what? You move on. You go back to your life. And one day, I wake up and I'm right back where I started. I'd rather leave now while it still feels like I had a choice." Stallone shook his head. "You think I'm doing this out of pity?" She didn't answer. "You think I'm just gonna throw some cash at you and walk away?" His voice was calm, but firm. I'm not here to make myself feel better, Isabella. I'm here because you matter. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, like she was angry at herself for letting it fall. I don't know how to be that person anymore, she whispered. The person you remember, the one who had plans, who had dreams. I don't even know if she's still in there. Stallone reached out, covering her hand with his. His grip was steady, warm, real. Then we find her. She swallowed hard, her eyes locked on his ... A long silence stretched between them. Then finally, Isabella exhaled shakily and nodded ... Okay, she whispered. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow didn't have to look like yesterday. Life is unpredictable. Some people disappear from our lives. But sometimes fate gives us a second chance. The question is, will we take it? What do you think? Do second chances really change lives? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.